Hey everyone, it's Franchise Horror Reviews and hope everybody's having a great day so far today. This video is going to be running down the Creepshow franchise and ranking the story segments from worst to best. Now, if you saw the title of the video, I'm also including Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, into the mix because I really consider this a true Creepshow 3, at least in spirit. And in my past reviews, I did talk about the connections that movie has to the Creepshow franchise and how a lot of people headcanon it, and there's legitimate reason behind it. So I will be including that with the movies Creepshow from 1982, Creepshow 2 from 1987, and Creepshow 3 from 2006. So, a few things first. If you see my backdrop here, you see my Friday Part 5 homage here. I'm currently working on a horror wall. I have some Goosebumps stuff I want to put over here, some original comic art, and I have some Creepshow stuff I kind of want to add on here, and kind of spritzing up the backdrop here. I have a vision, and it's going to cost a lot of money, so bear with me, and you might see this room more and more once I get some stuff hung up, and I hope you guys enjoy the stuff I do have in my collection and get to gawk at it every video. So, yeah, okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing, the Creepshow franchise is pretty much in my top 2 favorite franchises of all time. It's this and the Evil Dead franchise. Like, these two are, without a shred of a doubt, almost flawless franchises to me. Minus Creepshow 3. Which I don't even consider canon, but it's there, and you kind of have to deal with it. But for the most part, this and like Evil Dead are my favorites, like in total. I'm super excited for the Evil Dead Rise movie coming out very soon. I cannot wait for that movie. You have no idea. And I cannot wait to get into those reviews for that franchise. But yeah, Creepshow's super solid. I mean, the original Creepshow movie, I'm wearing a t-shirt right here. You can kind of see the artwork, right? The angle doesn't do the shirt justice, but this is my favorite movie ever made. And if you want to hear all my thoughts about the original Creepshow, which is my favorite, you can go watch that review. I gave that movie a sloppy, wet kiss at the whole review. It's honestly perfect to me. Yeah, so let's get into the story ranking. Now, there's 16 stories we're going to be looking at. There are some other stories associated with the franchise that I'll get into at some other point. Like I said, I'm only touching the stories featured in the films, and I'm only touching the segments. I'm not talking about the character wraparound stories, none of that. I don't think that really matters. So, from worst to best. So, at number 16, pretty much the first 5 come from Creepshow 3. And Creepshow 3 is a fucking god-awful movie, right? And if you haven't seen it before, you're not missing anything. But if you have seen it, you know the struggle, right? There's essentially a 3-way tie from this number 16 slot, but I think I'm going to have to give it to The Haunted Dog from Creepshow 3, the final segment here. This story is just blatantly bad, with a terrible, terrible premise. I mean, it's trying to take elements from The Hitchhiker from Creepshow 2 and do it a little bit differently, but the acting is terrible. The budget does not help the story. The effects done by Greg McDougall probably are the worst of his in this entire film. And none of the characters are likable, which is it's not the worst thing ever in these Creepshow stories to have bad characters, but in this story, it's not done cleverly at all with this bad character. You don't really get to see anything come out of the story that's remarkable or anything. The main character, he is a fucking pompous dick, and he does get what's coming to him. But the presentation is terrible. And that pretty much goes for the entire movie here, whether we're talking even at the best of segments. It's just an abomination. And this essentially from, like I said, from 16 essentially to 12. These are all fucking dog shit. I had to pick one. It would be The Haunted Dog and Dead Last. Now, number 15 is going to be from this film as well, and it's called The Professor's Wife. This one, I just like the previous one, I gave both of these 1 out of 5 stars. These are terrible. The Professor's Wife might honestly be one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in film. These characters are supposed to be like these smart guys, and they're coming to visit a professor and his fiance/wife, and this whole story is just filled with idiotic shit, and it's played for shock value, and I have no words for how just jarringly bad it is. I really don't. I mean, that's all I have to say about this one. I guess you can get a chuckle out of this story for how absurd it is, but the absurdity of it doesn't make it good at all. It kind of makes it more memorable from this film. It makes it stand out a little bit, but it's god-awful, just like the one below it, so I have to put it here. And number 14, the last of the three-way tie, is the first segment in this movie, and it's called Alice. And like the other two, I gave Alice a 1 out of 5 stars. This segment, the one that kicks off the whole film, I think has some of the worst acting and worst setup, because since it's the first story and this film is trying to go this Pulp Fiction route, a lot of the stuff near the end feels completely random when you first watch this, and it's kind of jarring. But even beside that, the acting here is terrible. There's some stereotypes played up here in the story that are just really bad, and that's not just a problem in this story, it's in other stories too. And it's ripping from Alice in Wonderland and a Twilight Zone segment dealing with a universal remote, kind of similar to the story Click with Adam Sandler, or Click from Goosebumps, both with that Alice in Wonderland flair to it. And it's just really flat and boring in some parts. And what's interesting about it is the body horror of it, but it's played more for gross out than actual effectiveness. And it's just really unnecessary. Yeah, I really don't have much else to say about Alice. It's just really bad, really terrible. So yeah. And then at number 13, this one's a mild step up, but not by much. And it's The Radio, which is the second story from this film. This one has A.J. Bowen in it, and A.J. Bowen, I've said this before in my review of this film. I may never watch this film again, but A.J. Bowen does star in one of my personal favorite horror movies ever made called The Signal. And I love that film. And I think it's one of the most underrated apocalyptic horror movies ever made. But here, he feels a little bit wasted. This one has some of the worst ADR in the entire film. The worst stereotypes that come off racist. Dealing with a pimp and prostitutes living in this guy's building. It's like blatantly offensive, right? But even looking past that, the story's just bland. You know, you got this concept that kind of could work on paper with this, you know, sentient being communicating through a radio. It's kind of reminiscent to that movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, but done really bland and uninteresting. There's a cool premise about it, but the execution is it's very underwhelming, and the ending almost ruins the entire story completely. Even if, you know, it was kind of going that decent route, and then the ending just ruins it. So, yeah, this one I gave, I think, a 1.5 out of 5 stars. Very bland, very forgettable, and a very weak ending. But the best story out of here, and this one, I would say, is pushing somewhat decent. Pushing it. No, it's not great. I still think it's shit in a lot of regards. But if I had to pick a story out of here that I liked, it goes to Call Girl. And that's my number 12. Call Girl had the most potential in this whole film. This whole film is just low budget as shit. And the writers are terrible writers. But I will give them credit with this one story idea. I think this could have worked in a throwback Creepshow installment. Like, if you wanted to throw this in like a Creepshow movie from the 80s, this could work with, you know, George Romero or Stephen King's vision behind it. This story had probably the best acting. The premise, you know, seems kind of iffy and it's somewhat predictable, but it's very effective. It's played for shock value, and the shock value that's there kind of works. The only problem is that the length of this doesn't really do it justice. Nothing's really all that fleshed out. There is some slight subtext to take from it, and I guess the subtext would be, you know, I don't know the word for it, infidelity or you know, dangerous activities. Sometimes, you know, sometimes the doers of dangerous activities get themselves in situations where they're not the predator anymore. That's pretty much all you can get out of this story, but it wasn't too terrible compared to the rest, but it's still not great compared to the rest of the franchise. So, yeah, Call Girl. I gave this one about a 2 out of 5 stars. Okay. So pretty much the bottom 5 go to every single segment in Creepshow 3. Now, for the rest moving forward, these are all 3 stars or higher, right? We're going to be jumping around Creepshow, Creepshow 2, and Tales from the Dark Side from here. So, at number 11, we have the only 3 out of 5 star I gave, and I think this story isn't that terrible. I've heard people say that it's terrible, and it's like laughably bad. I disagree. I just think that it feels a bit played out, and it does feel kind of hokey. Very pulp style of storytelling here. You know, pulp era from like the turn of the century, the 20th century, right? But since it's adapting a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle story, I can understand that. And it's from Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. The first segment, it's called Lot 249. The acting in here is pretty good. I think Christian Slater, Julianne Moore, Steve Buscemi, they all did a great job. They had some great performances here. Just the characters weren't as engaging as other stories. It did kind of drag, and it got really predictable after a certain point. But the idea here, there is an idea, right? It's a revenge story. It's not really talking too much substance here, but there is that anti-hero vibe in the story that I kind of connect to. I do like me a good anti-hero story. There's a mummy in the story that's really cool. I think the body horror is great in some parts. It's just, like I said, it's just really hokey. And that's a lot to say for the Creepshow franchise, since this franchise is known for its schlock. But this one just doesn't capture me as well as some other stories in these movies. So it has to go here by default, but not terrible. It's actually decent. So there you go. I guess we're in the top 10, right? So at number 10, where do I go from here? We're going to Creepshow 2, all right? And my number 10, I adore this story. I just think it's held back by a few things. But it goes to the first segment in Creepshow 2, Old Chief Woodenhead. Now, Old Chief Woodenhead has that slasher ambiance to it that I quite adore. It has, I didn't mention in the review for some reason, but George Kennedy, like the legendary George Kennedy, plays the elderly gentleman in this story. And I think this one packs an emotional punch. It has more substance to it compared to the ones below it. There's ideas of vanity with like the trio of thugs in this story, and the elderly couple kind of represents regrets in life, and maybe some things are too late in life to do and some things aren't too late to do. And there's a vengeance aspect as well. Where I think this story kind of suffers, though, I feel like the story drags a little bit. I think this feels longer than it actually is. It might actually be as long as it is. But this one just feels like it drags out. And when we finally get to Old Chief Woodenhead in the story, as you can imply, there's something to do with a Chief Woodenhead, a wooden statue. All the stuff involving him feels toned down in the film. Feels like it's like edited to not be graphic, and a lot of stuff is done off screen. And I feel like that doesn't really help it. It's trying to go for this slasher motif, but it's a sanitized slasher motif. I gave this one about a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's a great, well, not great. It's a good one, you know, but not the best. All right. And then number 9 as well comes from this movie, and it's the last segment, and this is The Hitchhiker. Now, The Hitchhiker, I wish I brought this up in my last video, because I said in the last video, when I reviewed this movie, right, that The Hitchhiker was more about you can't hide secrets, and most of the time when you hide secrets, they're going to come back and surface, and you're going to have to deal with them head on. And quite literally and figuratively, the main character in this movie does that. And it also has subtext of adultery and stuff to kind of sink your teeth into. But one thing I failed to mention, right, that I don't know why I forgot to bring this up, is that presumably this story takes place in a town that's predominantly white, and the hitchhiker is an African American, right? And if you really want to, you know, pull back some more layers, it's kind of similar to a story in Creepshow 1 called They're Creeping Up on You. There might be some racist undertones in the story to kind of peel back, and some commentary going on about outsider mentality. And yeah, for that, since I for some reason did not click on that, I decided to bump this one up to a 3.75 out of 5. From my 3.5 out of 5 original, slightly. I still think that this one has effective horror in it, with dealing with some makeup effects with the hitchhiker and stuff. But the story just, it feels kind of rushed. It does have a Stephen King cameo in it, but it feels a little simple, and maybe that's the genius behind it. I just don't feel wowed with it. And it's good for what it is. It's actually pretty good. Just not the best. Kind of like Old Chief Woodenhead here. So yeah, that's my number 9. All right. Now my number 8, we're going to the first original Creepshow movie. And we're going to the first segment, and it's called Father's Day. Father's Day is a fun little story here. I feel like this is probably the best story to start off with in this film. Only because they get better from here, in my opinion. This one, I think it tries to go for a character study, but the problem is that this one, I feel like they tried to expedite the story a little bit here, and some of the characters don't get fleshed out as much. It's kind of rich in dialogue, and then after a certain point in the story, it just clicks on to like a slasher motif. And I think this is a better slasher motif than Old Chief Woodenhead, because there are actually some better visuals here. Still some stuff done off screen. But I think in pretty much for every single story in this first film, when monsters or something creepy comes out, there's that red and blue lighting coming through, and that was purposely done to accentuate how comic panels before... you know, pre-code in pre-code comics before 4-color technology, inks in comic paper, they would use red and blues to make the panels pop, like I feel like more dimensional. And I feel that's so genius, and you can clearly see that in this first segment they were trying that. It's definitely one of the more schlockier ones in the film, unfortunately, and in this whole franchise. I think that's what inherently holds it back. But it's still enjoyable. It's still good. I have really nothing else to say about it. It's just not the greatest. It's kind of similar to the two below it with Chief Woodenhead and The Hitchhiker. It just doesn't quite get there to that 4 out of 5 mark for me. So yeah, that's Father's Day. Now 7, 6, and my number 5 are kind of tied, but I guess we'll just talk about 7 and 6 first until we get to the top 5. But at number 7 is another story from this movie here, and it goes to They're Creeping Up on You, right? They're Creeping Up on You, I think, has some of the most layers in the whole franchise. There's so much stuff you can peel back with the story and dissect. I think E.G. Marshall did a fantastic job playing the lead character in this segment. I mean, there's themes from classism to racism to the perils of capitalism. And there's phobias here, and there's you know, there's symbolism dealing with the stuff in this story, like with bugs, and the main character kind of views people like bugs, and how mankind are more like cockroaches than humans. There's so much to dissect here, and there are some stuff in here that, you know, if you're afraid of bugs, this might get under your skin a little bit. This is more of a isolationist type of story as well. So you don't get much characters in the story. It's really it's like a unique character story. And parts of it is played up for shock value. And it's mildly schlocky, but not to the degree of some other ones in here. But for the final story, I think it's a good way to send off. I think there's a graphic little effect at the end that kind of sends it off good. And I think it's memorable enough. I give this one about a 4 out of 5 stars. It just doesn't like wow me all the way, but it's still fun. And then at number 6, kind of on the similar wavelength of thought, it goes to the third segment in this movie, and it's called Something to Tide You Over. Now, here are probably my favorite actors in the whole film. You got Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson playing the two main characters. And this story is about not really going into anything deep, but it's more about kind of inverting some tropes, dealing with like adultery, kind of flipping the victim over to the cheater, then the person who was cheated on. And it's a unique character study. It's just one of those things. It's very simple. It feels like a revenge story gone wrong. And it gets very schlocky near the end. But there's something about it. There's some charm to this story. Like on paper, this one should not be as high as it is. If I'm being honest. If it didn't have the actors in it and it had some other people playing it, this probably would be near the bottom where Lot 249 would be. But the actors make it what it is. And they still had that schlocky effects. You know, Tom Savini did the makeup effects in this film. And that red and blue light pop out the stories. And that kind of helps it too. But it's just, I don't know. Something about it speaks to me. A little more than the others below it. So, yeah, that's why I put it here. I gave this one about a 4 out of 5 stars. Most people probably wouldn't put it that high. Some people might actually put it higher. But I'm just being honest. Yeah. I'm sorry if you hear music. My neighbors like to blast music late at night for some reason. So, yeah. There you go. Now we're in the top 5. My top 5 favorite segments from these movies. Without a shred of a doubt. These 5 are the ones, like, if I could handpick, like, a best of Creepshow movie, and they, like, were to do, like, a Creepshow remake, and all these stories were in consideration, these are the 5 I would choose. At number 5, we have The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill. This one, I think, is probably more inherently divisive in the fandom that I've noticed. Some people love that Stephen King plays the lead actor and plays it up and hams up the role. Some people don't like how short it is and how simple it is. But I think it's brilliant. I think it's telling a really good isolationist story. And I brought this up in the review. It has this David Cronenberg The Fly remake vibe to it, where the main character gets like a death sentence. and they have to die alone, essentially, right? And this story does a really fast job at telling a story like that, and it goes to a dark place near the end. There's context of contemplating suicide, ending it all. There's fears about getting help, putting yourself out there. It's all there, right? And it just speaks to me. Something about the setting to it, something about just the simplicity of the story. It's great for what it is. Some people might disagree. I totally would understand if you put this one way lower than the others. I totally would understand. I've actually seen people debate this in The Hitchhiker plenty of times in people's rankings. Like those two seem like to be the biggest divisive ones in the franchise. I just happen to like this one more than Hitchhiker, so sorry. But yeah, that's my number 5. Now, at number 4. Now this one is kind of hard to put here, but I think this is my 4th favorite. And we're going back to Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. It's been a while. And we're looking at the second segment, and it's called Cat from Hell. Now, Cat from Hell was actually supposed to be in Creepshow 2, and I talked about that in my review, and if you want to hear a little story about that, you can go watch that review. But the Cat from Hell, like the other stories in this movie, has some really brilliant body horror to it. This is one hell of an eerie story. It gets to me a little bit. The acting, it's kind of like a unique character story in a way. Has an interesting premise behind it. A fun little, kind of like if you've ever seen the movie Mouse Hunt. It's not family friendly by any means, but it has that vibe to it where the main character, it's like Tom and Jerry. The hitman in the story is trying to hunt down this cat. And I don't know, it just has this vibe to it. And it's so goddamn creepy. And some visuals in here. This story's played up for more shock value. There's really no substance here to it. It's pure shock value. And it feels like a noir film. I like the style to it. I kind of appreciate it. I think it has a distinct style compared to the rest of the film. But yeah, this one was pretty well effective. And I feel kind of bad putting this story above some other ones that have genuinely more interesting story subjects and layers to them. But this one's just a really effective one, and it's scary as hell. I gave this one about a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This one's a highly revered one for me. Yeah, this would give me... If I saw this as a kid, I think I didn't see this till I was a teenager, I would have had nightmares. So yeah, there's that. Now, in my top 3, we're going back to Creepshow 2 and rounding this film off. We're going to the second segment, and it's The Raft. The Raft, kind of similar to Cat from Hell. There's really no substance to this movie. But what it does have is effectiveness. It's played for shock value. If it is talking about anything, it's maybe talking about the pressures of being a young kid and being around your friends and peer pressure and kind of waiting up the storm. Now that I think about it, it's kind of like inverted peer pressure, right? You get yourself into a situation where everybody's screwed, and then you have to wait for people to make dumb decisions and not do the decisions they're making until you're left alone to deal with the situation. It's kind of intriguing, but I think the story is mostly remembered for, just the simplicity of it. The premise is kind of fun. You got like a unique feeling monster to it, and some really grueling body horror. And I think a lot of the body horror in this film as a whole went to this story. And I think the the filmmakers understood that to avoid getting X rating on the MPAA, they're probably going to have to dial down Hitchhiker a little bit, dial down Old Chief Woodenhead. But for the Raft, they were willing to go balls to the wall a little bit with some of this effect stuff. And I can see why. There's just not that much substance to the story, so adding that kind of makes the story pop a little bit. And yeah, that's why I think this one's effective. It's just a really memorable one. So yeah, that's my number 3, The Raft. Now, my top 2. My top 2 were essentially down to 2 stories. Lover's Vow from Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, and The Crate from the original 1982 Creepshow movie. Now these two, I went back and forth in my mind which one's my favorite. And I had to be honest with myself and say which one's the best. Even though I love this story here, my number 2 goes to the 4th segment in the original Creepshow movie, and it's called The Crate. The Crate, in my opinion, has one of the most thought-provoking stories in the whole franchise. It's one that really pokes at controversy a little bit, and maybe that's why I like it so much. But I dig the atmosphere to it, and I dig the ideas behind it. So this story kind of comes to commentate on, you know, acting on impulses that all humans have. And so, you know, what I mean by that is, like, let's say somebody's annoying you, and you think to yourself, man, I wish I would punch him in the face right now. But you don't do it because you're taught self-restraint. But the story is kind of like poking at that idea and kind of offering the characters in the story an opportunity to capitalize on those things and potentially getting away with it. And it's intriguing to think about. And I think, you know, the actors in here, you have like Hal Holbrook, Adrienne Barbeau, some really well-renowned early 80s actors that were in a lot of things. And the story's just memorable. I think the monster is one of the most memorable monsters in the Creepshow franchise. The setup. I think it has some... It's one of the stories that actually show physical gore and violence in it, and it's memorable. The setup is really creepy and unique. And there's a thing involving a stairwell in the story, and this has scarred me ever since I was a kid and have seen this movie. Every time I go down a stairwell in some building, I get creeped out thinking about a part of the stairwell where there can be like something underneath it. I don't want to go anywhere near that. It creeps me out so bad. But yeah, this one's a super effective one. It has that like blue and red lighting that I think makes it pop a little bit. And it has some shock value moments to it, and a cliffhanger ending that I think would be fun to see like a sequel to or something. I don't know. It has some sequel bait to it. This is my second favorite. Yeah. So my number 1 favorite story in this little franchise here goes to the last story in Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, Lover's Vow. Lover's Vow, holy shit, is I think a masterpiece. I think it's a masterpiece. Not only in body horror in cinema, I think this is one of the best body horror stories I've ever seen in my life. The actor, you know, what's his name? James Remar. Most things he's in, he was in Dexter, right? I love him in most things he's in, minus Mortal Kombat Annihilation. But he's great in this. This has a story about like being down on your luck and being given a new opportunity, and then ending up throwing it all away, right? Breaking promises, right? And this story goes there. It's super emotional. Some imagery here is really great, like seriously great. Like that. I think that's why this is one of my personal favorite movies, is because of this story, and it's so memorable. I give a round of applause to the effects department for this story. Truthfully, I think it's well directed, well acted, and the twist involved is kind of predictable. It's kind of, but not to the extent that you think it goes in the story. You can probably predict a half of it, but the other half you're not going to see coming. And it's genuinely shocking. It's sad. It's depressing. it pretty much encapsulates the Creepshow franchise, I think, the best. Even though it's not a Creepshow movie, it's Tales from the Dark Side of the movie. But in spirit, it actually is Creepshow 3, in my opinion. And like I said in previous videos, go watch those reviews about these, and I talk about why this movie is pretty much a Creepshow movie. I think it's the best one, hands down. So yeah, that's my ranking of the Creepshow franchise, plus Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, I guess. The movie segments. Let me know down in the comments section, how would you rate this franchise? What, in your opinion, what's the worst one? What's the best one? What order would you put these in? What's your favorite? What's your least favorite? You know, whatever you feel like commenting. I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.